The courtroom doors opened. A black woman in handcuffs walked in, her gaze calm, almost eerily composed. She looked straight toward the judge's bench. Marcus Hayes, the presiding judge, froze for a split second. It was Leona. His childhood best friend. The one who had grown up with him in New Harmony, a southern town marked by invisible lines and silent rules. A place they had both once dreamed of escaping forever. And now, she stood before him, charged with assault and robbery. She was no longer the Leona of summer afternoons beneath the oak tree, but a defendant in a serious criminal trial. Marcus looked into her eyes. There was no fear, no pleading. Only a silence so heavy, it stole his breath. Had she truly committed a crime? Or was she once again a victim of the very system they had once hoped to escape? The morning session began with the same quiet routine. The jury seats were filled. Attorneys on both sides prepared their files. Judge Marcus Hayes, of the state of Louisiana, sat upright behind the bench, his expression calm and unreadable. This was routine. A habit etched into muscle memory after more than a decade in the black robe. Another criminal case. Another indictment to read. Another name to try. Nothing unusual, until he heard that name spoken by the court clerk. Leona Anderson. A chill ran down his spine. His brow furrowed slightly. He looked toward the defendant being escorted in, his heart skipping a beat. For a moment, he almost didn't believe his own eyes. The woman walked slowly, wrists cuffed, her face thin, her gaze steady but tired. Her curly hair was tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Her shoulders slumped slightly. Her clothes were plain and pale, like countless other defendants who had walked through this room. But he knew instantly. It was Leona. It was her. His best friend from childhood. The girl who had grown up with him on the dusty streets of New Harmony. The girl with the clear, ringing laugh. The one who used to race him down narrow hills on their bikes, who once whispered dreams beneath the old oak tree in his backyard. The girl who once told him, "We have to leave this place, Marcus. Far away. Somewhere no one gives us those strange looks anymore." Old images exploded in his mind, vivid and aching. They had promised never to abandon each other. But then life intervened. Prejudice. Distance. Silence. They lost contact. And now, she was here, just a few feet away, no longer the carefree Leona of the past, but a defendant. A woman being judged by the very person who had once known her best. Marcus swallowed hard, trying to keep his face composed, but his hands trembled slightly as he turned the page. He read the charges in a steady tone, just like always, but every word cut deeper than it should have. In his mind, the image of that radiant young girl was still vivid, now replaced by this weary, downcast gaze beneath long lowered lashes. Leona glanced at him. A brief flicker of recognition. A flash of surprise. Then she looked away, as if hiding from the truth. No one else noticed. No one else knew the depth of the bond they once shared. But Marcus knew. And he was sure Leona did too. The trial officially began. The attorneys stood, the prosecutor opened his files, the jury waited for the arguments. Everything followed procedure. But to Marcus, every voice in that room sounded distant. Faded. Because his mind was still trapped in the past, back where two kids once dreamed of justice. And now, he had to face that dream, reborn as a nightmare. Marcus looked at Leona, then back down at the case file. The words on the page were still clear, but his mind was no longer there. It was filled with images from the past. They had once been inseparable, so close that words weren't even necessary to understand each other. Memories he thought long buried came flooding back, layer by layer. They had grown up together in New Harmony, a small town tucked deep in the heart of Louisiana. The town was unremarkable, except for its endless fields, and the stark line that divided one side of the street from the other. Marcus's family lived in a gray-roofed house on a quiet block, where neighbors trimmed their lawns and said good morning. Leona, on the other hand, lived at the end of a dusty red road, where sagging houses leaned into each other, and the car in the front yard hadn't run in years. They met by chance one early summer afternoon. Marcus had chased a runaway kite too far and ended up in an unfamiliar part of town. By the stream, Leona was sitting with a handmade fishing rod. She looked at him curiously, and he stood there, unsure. But a few exchanged words, a simple direction, and a shy smile were all it took to start a quiet friendship. From then on, they found ways to meet again. Under the old oak tree near the invisible line between neighborhoods, they would sit for hours, talking, painting dreams of their own. Leona loved to draw. Marcus loved to tell stories. They shared everything, from the fear of being scolded for coming home late, to the hope that one day, they might live somewhere no one looked at them with suspicion. The town was small, but gossip spread fast. More than once, they felt the sting of adult stares, furrowed brows, muttered comments. Still, they carried on, as if what bound them was something deeper than skin or class, a quiet, powerful understanding. Marcus still remembered the look in Leona's eyes one evening at sunset. She turned to him and asked, softly, "Have you ever wanted to leave this place, forever?" That question haunted him for years. He hadn't known what to say back then. And now, sitting in his judge's chair, he didn't dare answer it even to himself. But the promise they made, to leave, to escape the weight of old expectations, never came true. As it always does, reality stepped in. One day, the adults found out. The interference was quiet but final. And then, Leona disappeared from Marcus's life, as if she had never existed. Leaving behind an emptiness, and a question that would never be answered. Every beautiful memory carries a fracture. That afternoon, golden sunlight poured across the wooden porch of Leona's small house. The breeze stirred the trees, sending dry leaves swirling beneath the feet of two children sitting side by side. Marcus, only 14 then, had just finished telling a joke. Leona burst into laughter. She leaned her head back, giggling like nothing in the world could ever make her sad. Her dark eyes sparkled under the sun. Marcus laughed too. Neither of them knew that would be the last time they'd laugh together. The sharp clack of leather shoes on the steps jolted them. Marcus's father stood there, dressed in a crisp gray suit, his face tight with anger. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. One look was enough to silence the world around them. "Go home. And from now on, you are not to see that girl again," he said, voice low and final, like a command carved in stone. No explanation. No room to argue. Marcus froze. His heart pounded. He glanced at Leona, waiting for her to say something. But she didn't. She was quiet for a moment. Then her eyes lowered, and her voice came out like a whisper in the wind. "I understand." No blame. No tears. Just those two words, enough to cut the thread between them. She stood, brushed off her pants, and walked inside. She didn't look back. Marcus was pulled away in silence. On the way home, his mind was blank. His chest felt heavy. He didn't speak. He didn't dare to. And from that day forward, they never saw each other again. Weeks later, whispers ran through the town. Leona's family had moved out quietly, no goodbyes, no forwarding address. As if they had never lived there at all. Marcus tried to ask his mother, but all he got was a head shake and a curt reply, "It's over. Let it go." So he let it go. He studied. He worked harder. He pushed himself to become someone his father could be proud of. Graduated with honors. Got into a prestigious law school. climbed his way from legal clerk to attorney, and finally to a seat on the bench. He had reputation, status, the power to decide people's fates. But one thing he could never regain, was Leona. And then this morning, more than 20 years later, her name rang out again. Leona Anderson. In a criminal courtroom. As a defendant. A woman now facing prison. Marcus opened the file, but his heart hadn't settled. A few minor offenses in her past, loitering, mild resistance, one record of petty theft. But nothing violent. Nothing that marked her as dangerous. He looked at her, sitting quietly in the defendant's chair. Her eyes no longer sparkled like they used to. And he couldn't help but wonder, what happened to Leona? What had dragged her from that world of childhood dreams to this place, where he judged and she was judged? And deeper still, was it possible that he, through his silence back then, had played a part in sending her down this path? Prosecutor Richard Wallace stepped forward with his usual confident demeanor. He cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and began presenting the case in a calm but icy tone. He stated that the defendant, Leona Anderson, had entered a convenience store in Baton Rouge late at night, argued with the cashier, then assaulted them and took money from the register. His voice was steady, his words precise, but each sentence felt like a stone being placed on Marcus's chest. He listened quietly, but his eyes never left Leona. She sat there, silent and composed. Her hands rested on her lap, her gaze fixed straight ahead. No fear, no anger, just a tiredness, deep and old, as if it had lived in her for a long time. She didn't look at Marcus. Not even once. The only witness, a store clerk who was present during the incident, was called to the stand. He claimed the attacker was a woman in a red hoodie, of average height and build. When asked to describe the face, the witness hesitated. He shook his head and said he couldn't be sure because the store was dimly lit, and the hoodie covered most of her face. But when the prosecutor asked, if you had to choose someone who most resembles the attacker, who would it be, the witness pointed at Leona. One pointed finger. No certainty, just assumption. But that assumption was enough to sway the already wary glances in the room. Next, the surveillance footage was shown. The image was blurry, shaky, and poorly lit. A figure rushed into frame, moved quickly, wrestled with the cashier, and disappeared behind a shelf. No face was visible. No sound. No detail that could clearly confirm identity. Marcus tilted his head, examining the screen closely. He knew he couldn't interfere. He couldn't ask questions. But inside, he kept wondering, if the face isn't clear, if the witness isn't sure, then where is the actual evidence? The prosecution continued, emphasizing that Leona was arrested just a few blocks from the scene, carrying an amount of cash nearly identical to what had been stolen. But there was no red hoodie. No physical evidence. Just her presence near the scene and her general resemblance to the vague description. Defense attorney Lisa Porter stood to respond. Her voice wasn't loud or aggressive, but it was firm and clear. She stated that the prosecution's argument relied on assumptions. No one had clearly seen Leona's face. No one placed her at the scene. No stolen item was recovered. They arrested her because she was nearby. Because she had money in her pocket. Because she looked like someone they imagined, Lisa said. But looking like someone isn't evidence. Outwardly, Marcus maintained a calm demeanor. But inside, everything was shaking. Something felt wrong. Not because this was Leona, but because the entire case was standing on dangerously unstable ground. What they called evidence was merely a collection of guesses, stitched together more by suspicion than truth. He glanced at Leona. She remained still, didn't speak, didn't react. And that quiet composure shook him even more. She wasn't hoping for mercy. She wasn't pleading. She was waiting, for truth to speak. Not from him, but from the very system that had once turned its back on her. And Marcus, seated at the center of this courtroom, now faced the greatest internal conflict of his life. One part of him, the judge, was bound by law. But the other, filled with memory, understanding, and 2 decades of quiet regret, was stirring. He couldn't let emotions take over. But he also couldn't close his eyes to a truth slowly emerging through the cracks. And he knew, this was only the beginning. Tension grew in the courtroom. All eyes turned toward defense attorney Lisa Porter as she slowly stood and walked toward the witness stand. Her voice wasn't loud or rushed, but it carried a deliberate firmness. She began by repeating what everyone had just heard. You said the attacker wore a red hoodie, correct? The witness nodded, but his eyes wavered. Did you clearly see the person's face? Lisa asked. The witness hesitated. Not really, he admitted. She had the hood up. The lighting in the store wasn't great. Lisa paused, then pressed, so, you can't say for sure that the person you saw is the defendant sitting here today? Not completely, the witness said, his voice growing quieter. A brief silence settled over the room. Lisa shifted focus to the arresting officer. He stepped onto the stand, his posture slightly stiffer than earlier. Lisa locked eyes with him. Did you find a red hoodie when you arrested Ms. Anderson? She asked. No, the officer replied. Did you or anyone return to the area to look for it? Lisa followed up. No, he said again, this time more softly. We didn't have time. She repeated, slowly, for the jury to hear clearly, no red hoodie. No search of the scene. She let the words hang in the air, then stepped closer to the jury box, her eyes meeting theirs one by one. So what made them so sure Leona was the attacker? A vague description. A piece of clothing never recovered. And a suspect arrested only because she happened to be nearby. The courtroom was silent. No one spoke, but something was shifting. One juror furrowed their brow. Another tilted their head, scribbling quickly in a notebook. The firm expressions from earlier were now beginning to waver. Lisa continued, softer now, but just as sharp. No weapon. No physical trace. No direct witness pointing to Leona. She turned toward Marcus, not pleading, but reminding him that the system needed his balance to function. Marcus sat motionless, maintaining the posture of a judge. But inside, his heart beat loud. He was no longer just listening with his ears. He was feeling with his heart, with memory, with the weight of justice pressing against human truth. He watched each juror closely, their eyes, their expressions, the slow emergence of doubt. This was no longer a routine trial. It wasn't just about whether Leona was guilty. It was a raw glimpse into how a system could so easily attach guilt to someone based on nothing solid. And in that moment, Marcus understood. This trial wasn't only a test for Leona. It was a test of his faith. His faith in justice, in law, in a system he had once believed to be unquestionably right. But now, faced with the cracks, he couldn't look away. He couldn't keep believing blindly, if believing meant risking the life of someone who might be innocent. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted palpably as defense attorney Lisa Porter rose to her feet and announced that the defense would call an expert in video analysis. An older man took the witness stand, carrying a thick file, his voice deep and steady. He introduced himself as a forensic video analyst, with years of experience working on cases across the state. Lisa stepped closer, her eyes serious, her tone calm. Sir, have you reviewed the footage submitted by the prosecution? Yes, I have. Multiple times, using specialized equipment. And what can you confirm from it? The expert lifted his gaze toward the jury. I can confirm that the video is too blurry to determine the identity of the person captured. The face is not visible. Gender cannot be clearly identified. And the body build cannot be scientifically compared to the defendant. The courtroom fell silent, except for the soft sound of papers rustling. But that wasn't all. Lisa continued, besides the clarity issue, did you notice anything else? The expert nodded. The timestamp on the video appears to have been altered. Specifically, it was off by a few minutes compared to the store's original system logs. This brings into question the accuracy of the recorded time of the incident. The prosecutor immediately stood to object, claiming the analysis was speculative and that minor technical discrepancies were not enough to discredit the evidence. But his rebuttal didn't carry the same weight anymore. Several jurors began exchanging glances. An elderly woman furrowed her brow. A younger man set down his pen, listening more intently. Lisa turned back to the jury, her voice lower but firmer. You cannot convict a person based on speculation. You cannot take someone's freedom away based on a grainy video and an uncertain finger pointing. The law doesn't allow that. And neither should our conscience. Marcus, seated at the judge's bench, looked around the courtroom as if seeing every detail for the first time. Something inside him cracked, a thin layer built from years of unquestioned faith in the system. Now, it was beginning to splinter. He could feel the shift in the air. No more automatic nods. No more blind trust in the prosecution. People were thinking. They were questioning. They were doubting. And so was he. In that moment, Marcus's eyes met Leona's. She raised her head, silently gazing back at him. Those eyes, still the same as all those years ago. Clear, but resilient. Gentle, but full of the longing to be heard, to be trusted, to be seen. Back then, her eyes had told him she just wanted to be treated like any other human being. Nothing more, nothing less. And now, here they were again. Not the eyes of a child, but of a woman who had lost much. Yet still holding on to the one thing that mattered, the hope of being treated fairly. Marcus looked into her eyes and knew, this trial wasn't just about Leona. It was about the very faith he once held in the idea of justice. As Lisa stepped back, Leona slowly rose. The metal cuffs on her wrists clinked quietly, yet sharply. Under the sterile white lights of the courtroom, the red marks on her skin were visible. She didn't hide them. Nor did she bow her head. Leona looked directly at the jury, then swept her gaze across the courtroom. Her voice rang out, not trembling, not faltering, but with a strength that silenced the room. I know, she began, I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. I've been arrested for petty things. I've done things I regret. But not this time. Not this. She paused, breathing deeply, steadying herself. Her eyes shone with a flicker of determination, but behind them was something deeper. A sorrow that had aged into something weighty, something without shape but heavy just the same. I've spent my whole life fighting, she continued, slow and clear, just so I wouldn't be looked at with judgment in someone's eyes. I'm not asking to be praised. I don't need pity. I just want to be seen as a real person. Not automatically a criminal, just because of the skin I was born in. At that moment, the courtroom went still. No pages turning. No pens tapping. Just Leona's voice, echoing through the wide, cold chamber. That night, I was walking home from a friend's house. I had no idea there had been a robbery. I didn't hear any sirens. I just saw the lights of a police car behind me, then someone shouting, "Don't move." Leona looked down at her cuffed hands. They didn't ask what I was doing. Didn't ask my name. Didn't say, "We need to check something." They didn't need to hear anything I had to say. She raised her head, locking eyes with the jury. They just looked at me, a black woman, and decided I was guilty. A long silence followed. No one said a word. Leona didn't cry. But the silence was sharper than any tear. It was the kind of silence that demands accountability. Marcus tightened his grip on the bench. His throat caught. He inhaled deeply, trying to steady his voice. He couldn't look Leona in the eyes, not right now. Not because he was ashamed, but because he feared her gaze would pierce through the neutral front he'd tried to uphold throughout the trial. He turned away, staring at the window where sunlight filtered through thin blinds. But in his mind, it was her voice he heard. Full. Human. Not a defense, but a truth spoken from the deepest part of someone the system had long pushed to the margins. For the first time, Marcus realized that truth doesn't always lie in court transcripts. Not in witness names, charges, or fuzzy surveillance frames. It lies in emotion. In the eyes raised not in plea, but in hope of understanding. And in that moment, he understood, if justice couldn't hear that voice, it was never justice at all. Lisa stepped into the center of the courtroom, her voice low but clear, her gaze sweeping across each face in the jury box. She didn't talk much about the law. She didn't dwell on technical details. She spoke about Leona, the person who had sat before them for days. I'm not asking you to ignore what you've heard, Lisa said, I'm only asking you to look closer. To see a person, not a case file. A woman who was judged before any real evidence was ever shown. She paused, slowly walking toward Leona's table. If you still have doubt, ask yourself this, is what we've heard enough to take someone's freedom away? Is it enough to call someone a criminal, when all we have is speculation, and skin color? The air in the courtroom seemed to slow. All eyes turned to the jury. The prosecutor stood and responded, relying on procedure, reason, and the idea of reasonable suspicion. He claimed the police had done their duty. That the system had functioned as it always did. And that the suspect fit the description, was found nearby, and carried a similar amount of cash, that should be enough to convict. Marcus listened to both sides. He wasn't allowed to give an opinion. Couldn't lean toward either side. But his eyes, the subtle nods, the tightening grip on the edge of his seat, all revealed his inner conflict. Within him were two currents, his responsibility as a judge, and the quiet uprising of a conscience that still saw Leona as the girl he once knew like the back of his hand. The jury withdrew to deliberate. 1 hour. Then 2. No one knew what was being said behind closed doors, but no one left. Even Lisa didn't sit down. She leaned against the table, eyes distant. Leona sat quietly, hands clasped, her gaze fixed on some point far away. She wasn't waiting. She wasn't hopeless either. Just quiet, like someone too familiar with judgment. Finally, the jury room door opened, and the courtroom held its breath. The foreperson stepped forward, a folded paper in hand, voice slightly shaky with the weight of the moment. In the matter of the state of Louisiana versus the defendant Leona Anderson, we find the defendant, not guilty. A soft exhale came from somewhere in the back. A gentle round of applause flickered, then vanished. No cheers. No celebrations. The courtroom remained as still as it had been before. Marcus tapped his gavel gently, his voice steady, the defendant is free to go. This court is adjourned. Leona didn't move at first. After a long moment, she rose. She didn't smile. Didn't raise her arms. Didn't say a word. To her, this wasn't a victory. It was simply not being buried under a false sentence. And even that, though important, was not enough to heal what had been lost. Marcus watched her. His heart didn't feel lighter, as he'd hoped. Something was still unfinished. Not because Leona had walked free, but because he knew she had never truly lived free in the first place. And he, the one who once dreamed with her, was now the one who had watched her fight for freedom from a system meant to protect all, but which didn't protect everyone equally. The courtroom slowly emptied. Empty chairs. Case files stacked away. The soft sound of shoes echoing on old tiled floors. The air after the verdict felt drained of energy. Just a few people remained, gathering papers, closing windows, leaving quietly. Marcus sat still behind the bench. The gavel lay beside him. The case file was closed. But inside, the trial wasn't over. He looked down at his hands. Hands that once wrote judgments, handed down decisions, believed that the law was the foundation of justice. Leona approached, her steps quiet, unhurried. No police by her side. No judgmental eyes. Just two people, facing a shared past. She stopped a few feet away. Her voice was soft, but firm. "Why didn't you say anything? You recognized me." Marcus looked up, meeting her eyes. He nodded. "I did." He paused, then exhaled. "But I couldn't. If I had said anything, if I admitted I knew you, the trial would have been compromised. Fairness would have been lost." Leona nodded silently. Not angry. Not bitter. Just a sadness that seemed to have heard those words many times before. As if the answer had already been written, from the moment their eyes met on that first day in court. "You talk about fairness," she said, never breaking eye contact, "but this world has never been fair to me. Not because I didn't try. But because there are things I can't change, no matter how hard I try." Her voice wasn't sharp. Just honest. Marcus said nothing. There was no argument that could undo what she'd said. He didn't need to reply. Because he understood. Deeply. "I wish," he said slowly, as if each word carried weight, "I wish I could have done more. Back then, and now." Leona gave him a soft, sad smile. Not because of what he said, but because she knew, some things couldn't be undone. Then she turned and walked away. Her back straight. No more cuffs. No more court. But she still carried a burden that no one else could see. Marcus watched her go. The doors opened, then closed behind her. A chapter in their lives shut. But the echoes remained, smoldering in his chest. And he knew, what she left behind today would change the way he saw the world forever. The courtroom was now empty. Only the golden light of late afternoon streamed through the fogged glass windows, casting the shadow of the judge's bench onto the worn tile floor. Marcus was still sitting there. His hands rested loosely on the table. No more case files. No more rules. Only silence remained. And in that silence, he finally understood something he had never truly grasped over all these years. Justice isn't just a system. It's not made of clauses, verdicts, or cold procedures. Justice is the people who stand in this room. It's how we see each other. It's how we listen. It's whether we dare to see a real human being behind the words that accuse them. Some verdicts aren't written on paper. They're not delivered by a gavel. They don't appear in court records. They live deep in memory. Etched into conscience. Like the one Marcus gave himself, long ago, when he didn't have the courage to speak up. And now, even though Leona had been declared not guilty, he knew, she still carried the wound of an invisible sentence, one that had lasted for years. Marcus looked at the judge's chair beneath him. He used to think it was a seat of power. A place to decide right and wrong. But after this trial, he understood, it was also a chance to make a difference. Not just to uphold the law, but to protect the people within it. He rose, slowly stepping away from the bench. His steps were heavy, but his heart was lighter. He knew that from this day forward, he wouldn't do this job the same way again. He would listen more. He would understand more. And he would never forget Leona's eyes, standing in that courtroom, brave, without blame, asking only to be seen as human. "And you, what do you think about this case? Was Leona truly forgiven, or was she just lucky enough to survive in a system that never made room for people like her?" Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, don't forget to subscribe. We'll be back, with more truths that should never be forgotten.